How did the New York Giants grade out during free agency? I'll give you my take coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, P-Train, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants Country over on the Fan Nation Network. And a big welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. You are all appreciated and loved by yours truly. Please, if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and click that little bell for notifications anytime I post a new video. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to grade the Giants free agency strategy. I'm going to go into detail about what they did, give you some takes on that, give you not so much a player-by-player grade, but I'm going to talk about things like value and that sort of thing. So we'll do some grades. And then in segment 2, do the Giants have concern about Daniel Jones? You know, more and more reports are popping up that there is some concern that the Giants have about Jones. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then in segment 3, we're going to hear from Matt Alquiza. He is a reporter for All Panthers, which is part of the Fan Nation Network, one of the sister sites of Giants Country. And he's going to fill us in on what we need to know about new Giants edge rusher Brian Burns. So that is our agenda for today. Again, welcome on in to everybody. Let's jump right in because we got a lot, as usual, to get through. All right, we're going to start off with grading the job done by General Manager Joe Schoen in free agency. And I think before we can issue any kind of grades or any kind of analysis, we have to take a look at where the Giants were as a roster before free agency started, what their needs were, and what they did to address the needs. So the Giants came into free agency with all kinds of holes. I mean, their roster just looked like Swiss cheese. They were missing depth on the offensive line. Edge rusher was a problem. The defensive secondary, they needed some help back there. You know, they needed a backup quarterback. You know, running back was a question mark. Just all kinds of problems. So Shane, in putting together his plan, took the approach that I think the Giants should have been using all along, but kind of got away from, you know, in recent years. And that is, instead of building from the outside in, Shane addressed the needs from the inside out. So in other words, he addressed offensive line by adding 2 offensive linemen, John Runyon Jr. and Jermaine Illuminor. He addressed edge rusher, which is part of that front 7, by adding Brian Burns via trade. And he kind of shifted the priority as far as the dollars were concerned. So in other words, instead of sinking big money into Saquon Barkley, a running back, he was able to go out and get a value pick or a value signing, in Devin Singletary, a guy who, you know, has led every team he's been on in rushing yardage, and who has, I think, more missed tackles forced in his career than Saquon does. He also did not, you know, make a pitch for Xavier McKinney, the safety. Now, I know that move irked a lot of people because they said, oh, you know, young homegrown talent, why not retain him? Simply because Shane did not feel, A, that McKinney was worth at least $13 million a year, which is what the transition tag would have cost him. But again, they're building from the inside out, because think about it, folks. Where did the Giants get beat most in recent years? In the trenches. So you build from the inside out. And, you know, if you've got a solid offensive line, you got a solid pass rush, luxuries like, you know, a top flight running back or, you know, a solid safety like McKinney, they become luxuries that you can add later on as sort of like the finishing touches. So you kind of see, where Shane was going with the plan. Now, did he address the needs that the team had? Offensive line, you can say that has pretty much been shored up. And by the way, folks, I know this is all on paper. I know we've got to see what it looks like when we get to training camp, but I'm talking about on paper. So just so we're clear that I'm aware that things can change going from on paper to what we see on the field. But anyway, Shane addressed the offensive line. He added depth now to the edge rushers. I mean, if Azeez Ojulari can stay healthy, the Giants now are 3 deep at edge rusher, something that they haven't been. I want to go back to when, I'd have to go back to 2011 when they had 3 deep at edge rusher. So they addressed that. They got a backup quarterback, a guy who can go in and win games for them if they need him to. That being Drew Lock. They feel pretty comfortable there. They added some competition in the back end of the defense. With Jalen Mills, who a cornerback by trade, but he's played safety, so he's got position flexibility. And speaking of which, you saw a lot of position flexibility added to this Giants team in free agency. So overall, Joe Shane spent $187.5 million on contracts, of which $114 million is fully guaranteed. It's a hefty price. The Giants, one of the biggest spenders in free agency. I know that, in the past, the Giants have gone crazy with free agents, but Shane, I think, tried to balance it out a little bit, because the numbers that I just gave you, they're a little deceiving because I think the bulk of the number is Brian Burns' contract. So Shane didn't go crazy, but he was measured in what he did as far as upgrading some of the depth on this roster. And let's just real quickly talk about, some of my favorite and not so favorite moves that he made. So I think the best value that Shane was able to get in free agency was Jermaine Illuminor, the offensive tackle / guard. Illuminor can play both guard positions. I think he can play both tackle positions. That's value. And I think that he got him for what, $7 million a year? That is value, ladies and gentlemen. And I would be stunned if Illuminor is not starting somewhere on that offensive line. As I've said before on other shows, I do believe that Evan Neal is going to have to compete for his job. It is not going to be handed to him, nor should it be. Illuminor is going to push him. And I'm going to be curious to see how well that works out there. All right. As far as the biggest gamble, I'm going to go with the Brian Burns contract. And here's why. It's not that I hate the move. I don't hate the move. But the contract that the Giants gave him, they paid him like a guy who has had multiple double-digit sack seasons instead of just one. So they are paying for what he could potentially become. Now, it remains to be seen how defensive coordinator Shane Bowen plans to utilize him. Coming up later on the podcast, I have Matt Alquiza of All Panthers coming on, and he's going to talk about how Brian Burns has been deployed in past systems. But that contract, I got to admit, folks, it makes me just a little squeamish because I don't like really, the concept of paying for potential. I would rather you show it and then pay for it. And that's not to say that Brian Burns hasn't shown flashes and the ability to be the guy that I think the Giants can expect of him. But that being said, I just think that, that contract, to be honest with you, that makes me just a little squeamish. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I mean, I hope he comes here, he balls out, double-digit sacks. Would love to see that, and again, not to jump ahead to the third segment when Matt comes on, but, Burns, I guess you could make a case and say that in Carolina, he hadn't really had a Robin to his Batman. So right now the Giants do have, that Batman and Robin duo, at least on paper. As far as competition, I mentioned there's going to be competition on the offensive line at safety. The running back position, Devin Singletary, I thought that was a great value as well. Devin Singletary is going to be probably the lead back, but the Giants are going to go more towards the committee approach, which is what, they started to gravitate towards last year anyway. So I'm very happy with that signing. I mentioned the Drew Lock signing. I'm happy with that. So overall, there's really nothing that Joe Shane did in free agency that I actually sat there and said, dude, what are you doing? What are you thinking there? It's a solid plan on paper, but as we know, championships aren't won in March. We have to see how it all comes together and if these guys can stay healthy and produce that the way the Giants are expecting them to. All right, coming up next, is there really concern developing about Daniel Jones? Yep, we have to talk about it. We'll do so right after this. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Chena, and coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast, I have a bonus episode for you. That's right. I had my good friend Hondo Carpenter, who is my colleague over at the Raiders Fan Nation site. He came on with me. He enjoyed being with us so much that he reached out to me. He says, "You've got to have me on your podcast again." He says, "We got to compare notes, and I've got to tell you about Jermaine Illuminor, and we've got to talk about, stuff that I've heard that maybe you didn't hear." So Hondo is back. I'm so excited to have him on, and that's going to be a bonus episode that I'm going to roll out for you probably over the weekend. So you have something to tide you over until we get to Monday and all new episodes of the Locked On Giants podcast. And we, of course, will keep bringing you content because there is no off season here at the Locked On Giants podcast. We just keep on cranking it out. And I hope you do enjoy the episodes and whatnot. So thank you again, those of you who have subscribed and have taken time to write, drop comments on. They are all appreciated. All right. In this segment, is there concern about Daniel Jones growing? All right. Now, over on Giants Country, we did an article about Judy Batista, who sent some, who did a video, and Judy Batista, of course, is an NFL Network analyst, and she weighed in and kind of said that there's some growing concern about Daniel Jones, mainly because of the injury history. I know, a lot of people will say, just get Daniel Jones an offensive line. He's going to be fine. But it's the injury history. That's where the concern is stemming from. Mike Lombardi, former GM, Mike Lombardi was on I think his podcast, and he even said something to the effect of the reason why the Giants looked into Russell Wilson is because Daniel Jones is not 100% healthy. To that, I say, no, of course he's not 100% healthy. He's 4 or 5 months now, 4 months removed from surgery, ACL surgery. And oh, by the way, they looked into Russell Wilson also because they were losing Tyrod Taylor. So they needed a backup quarterback regardless. So that being said, how much concern really exists for Daniel Jones? And again, the Giants believe that with an upgraded offensive line, with better receiving options, He doesn't have a number one receiver, and that's something, Joe Shane didn't address in free agency. Not that that was unexpected, because they are going to address it in the draft, but with better surrounding cast, if you will, around Daniel Jones, that he could be the guy that they saw in 2022. The concern, folks, is in his injury history. That's where the concern really lies. All right. I've said this before on the podcast. I will say it again. If Daniel Jones, God forbid, takes another wrong hit and suffers another neck injury, that could potentially end his playing career. Right? We're not talking about the knee. We're not talking about a broken bone. We are talking about the neck, the spine, and they have got to be careful with that. That is a concern. And I think, considering that Jones's contract, after this coming season, the Giants can get out of it if they need to, they may look to do so. I do believe the Giants are going to draft a quarterback. I don't know if it's going to be at 6. And I'll just talk real quickly about, the growing rumors that the Giants looked into trading up. Whereas at the start of free agency, I would have said, nah, they're not going to do that because they have all these holes. Could I maybe see it happening? Possibly. I'm not going to say, no, I don't think it's going to happen. I think, because they addressed a lot of positions in free agency, I could see it happening. Because look, here's the thing. Wide receiver is a deep class. So if you have to trade some assets to move up, you could probably still get a receiver late day 2, early day 3. Cornerback is a need that they haven't really addressed. They haven't really addressed cornerback 2. Shane Bowen doesn't play a lot of man coverage, at least not as much as what Wink Martindale liked to play. So you could probably get away with, a younger player there and have, especially if they're going to play a lot of zone coverage, because zone is usually a little easier for young cornerbacks to play. So, and this cornerback class, by the way, is also very deep. The quarterback class is deep. But here's the thing. If you have concerns, or if you're planning to get out of this contract because you just don't know that you can continue on with Daniel Jones given his injury history, now's the time to get a quarterback. All right. So it's kind of like, you go to a store and you say to yourself, okay, I need to get, product X off the shelf, and there's only a limited number left of product X. And you're like, well, maybe I'll wait until next time I come back. And then you come back and product X isn't on the shelf anymore. And now you've got to settle for something maybe you don't want down the line. This is a deep quarterback class. For the Giants to punt on a quarterback would be a huge mistake. I do not believe that Joe Shane will make that mistake. Will he trade up, considering, he's already given up one of his second round picks in the trade to get Brian Burns? I could, whereas I couldn't see it before, I'm starting to see it now. I don't know who the trade up partner is. We know Washington just traded away Sam Howell, so they're taking a quarterback. Not that Sam Howell's presence really made a difference, but I could see that being the case, because you just, in my opinion, you're on borrowed time with Daniel Jones. The other factor is the knee. Is he going to be as mobile and athletic? We saw what happened with Saquon when he ripped up his knee, and how maybe he lost a little bit of that burst that he had pre-injury. So who's to say that Daniel won't have that same problem? I mean, we don't know, obviously, but it's all things that need to be taken into consideration. And when Joe Shane spoke to the media at the end of last season, and he was asked about the level of concern with Daniel's injury history, he did admit it was a concern, which is why I believe the Giants are going to do something at quarterback in the draft after even addressing it in free agency with Drew Lock. So Giants, I think it's now possible that they do trade up. I'm not so sure just yet who it's going to be. I've got to work all those scenarios out. So I'll do that for a different show. And oh, by the way, I forget who it was, but somebody in the YouTube comments asked me to explain the injury guarantee in Daniel Jones's contract. I'll cover that in an upcoming show as well. I've got to do a little more research, make sure I understand it fully. I think I understand it, but I don't want to give you wrong information. So that being said, quarterback, Yep, it's coming in the draft. I'd be stunned if it's not. And I don't think it's going to necessarily be a developmental guy, like a day 3 type pick. I think by day 2, the Giants will have their quarterback if they don't trade up. So we'll see what happens there. All right, coming up next, Matt Alquiza joins me, and we talk about Brian Burns. He tells us everything we need to know about Brian as a pass rusher, as a player, as a person. So please hang around. We'll be right back. Hey, Giant fans, say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if their first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, you name it. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. And of course, I'm Patricia Trainer, your host, and I am now joined by Matt Alquiza, who is a reporter with All Panthers, part of the Fan Nation Network, sister site to Giants Country, which is the site, of course, I write for. And Matt is going to tell us a little bit about Brian Burns, the Giants' big trade acquisition. Matt, welcome to the Locked On Giants podcast.
Thanks for having me, Patricia. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you, Matt. And Matt, let's start off by, Burns, of course, first round pick. They put the franchise tag on him. Why do you think they look to move him?
It has been a long-term contract disagreement between Burns and the franchise. I mean, dating back to 2022, there was rumors about moving him at the trade deadline because there was differences in how he valued himself and how the Panthers valued him. Really came down. The reports are about like a $3 million per year difference in what he was wanting. The Giants gave him $30 million a year guaranteed. The Panthers were offering reportedly around 27. So, I mean, that's basically it. It's like a $3 million a year difference in value. And Carolina was not willing to pony up the cash to keep him. It's been a long ongoing saga between his camp and the Panthers over the way that they value him.
Now, down in Carolina, obviously, you've had some turmoil down there. You've had different head coaches, different defensive coordinators. So I'm sure players have been utilized different ways. But what system, what usage of Brian Burns' talent do you think worked the best for him?
Yeah, so his rookie year and his last year in Carolina, he was used as more like an outside linebacker in a 3-4 scheme. And the 4 years in between that, he was used primarily as a defensive end in a 4-3 scheme. And he has success doing both. I mean, he can pretty much do everything that you want an edge player to do in the modern NFL. He's a good run defender. He's strong enough to take on bigger tackles, but he's also quick enough to get past stronger or slower tackles. He's also a great pass rusher. I mean, he has pass rushing moves. He has counters. He can pretty much do it all. His most successful seasons came when he was a 4-3 defensive end. This past season, he ended up with, I think it was 8 sacks in 2023. His best year was 2022, 12.5 sacks, where he was primarily lined up as a defensive end. So if you're just looking statistically speaking, his best years came as a defensive end, not an outside linebacker.
You mentioned his pass rush moves. What are his go-to moves in his toolbox?
Yeah, primarily he's a speed rusher. I mean, he is an athletic freak. That's what he was billed as coming out of Florida State. So his ability to change direction and combine that with power, but he wins with speed most of the time. So yeah, he can dominate slower footed tackles, and that's really how he wins most of the time, is with speed.
Where is this game still developing, do you think?
Still developing. I would say just a little bit in the run game. I mean, there are times where you see him get overpowered. This past year, you saw a handful of times where he took plays off, and he admitted postseason that it was tough for him to give 100% effort every down without a long-term contract, and which is understandable. I mean, he's looking to lock down his future in the NFL contractually. And like I said, he admitted that he didn't give 100% every down. So I'm interested to see when he goes to New York, he's got his long-term deal, to see a 100% fully focused, down in, down out, dominant Brian Burns, especially now that he'll have another solid pass rusher across from him in Kayvon Thibodeau. His whole time in Carolina, he didn't have that. It was a rotating cast of opposing or defensive ends on the opposite side of the line from him. So he was the primary number one on the game plan for opposing offensive coordinators. You need to shut this guy down. So yeah, to answer your question, the run game, there are times where he gets overpowered, but in reality, he doesn't really have a ton of weaknesses. I mean, he's the kind of guy that can do it all. And like I said, excited to see what he does when he has like 100, he's going 100% full effort every snap with the Giants.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but last year he had I believe, an elbow injury. And that elbow injury, if I'm not mistaken, that limited him to, I want to say, what was it, the left side or the right side? Now I can't remember, but it was limiting him to one side because I think he was flip-flopping different sides. I mean, how much did that really affect his game? And did it maybe highlight that he's better off on one side as opposed to going back and forth?
Yeah, I think it just showed that he is a versatile piece. He played on the left side mostly last year, going against right tackles on the offensive side. So yeah, I don't think it like highlighted any sort of weakness. I think it just kind of showed that, yes, he can be still like make an impact in games on the left side. His best game of the year, if you're a Giants fan and you wanted to see the full Brian Burns experience, was week 1 at Atlanta. That was him at his most disruptive, getting in the backfield, took down Bijan Robinson a couple times for losses, had a handful of sacks in that game. I wouldn't say it really highlighted any weakness. I would say it just kind of proved his versatility, that he was limited to one side predominantly last year and still had an above average fringe Pro Bowl season.
What about, you look at his production, and I think he's had only one season with double-digit sacks.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the money that he got from the Giants, which good for him. He got himself a nice payday. But do you think the Giants maybe took a gamble there with the contract that they gave him?
Yeah, I do. And I mean, again, that was like the main sticking point between him and Carolina, was the way that he valued himself versus the way the franchise valued him. I think he's now the second highest paid defensive player of all time. That's obviously rich for a guy who is maxed out at 12.5 sacks. So it's a risk by the Giants, but I think it's a calculated risk in the fact that he has very rarely had a pass rushing duo that takes attention off of him. Since the time he came to the Panthers, like I said, he's been 1A on the offensive scouting report. So yeah, I think the Giants are kind of betting on his traits that I talked about. He betting on his pass rushing skills, his run stopping skills, and kind of saying, hey, if we pair him with another pass rusher that can take some of the attention from the offense, that can get chipped here and there and leave Brian Burns one-on-one, that his statistical output will skyrocket. So yes, it's a gamble for sure, but it's a calculated one, because I think we're about to see a version of Brian Burns that nobody has seen quite yet when he's unleashed with the Giants.
What about the intangibles that he brings? The leadership, what kind of teammate is he? Is he animated on the field? What about those traits?
Yeah, Spider Burns is his nickname. So you'll see him super animated. He's got a great Spider-Man celebration when he sacks the quarterback. I mean, you'll see going to Panthers games over the past few years, you'll see Spider Burns t-shirts everywhere, people in the stands dressed as Spider-Man. He's a fan favorite, mostly for his skills, but also just because he's an easy guy to root for. He is animated. He played this whole year without a contract. He didn't hold out for too long in the offseason. Yes, he did say that he didn't put in 100% max effort, but he still showed up every week, playing through an injury, risking his long-term future to suit up for Carolina. He's easy guy to root for. For by all accounts, everyone I've ever heard talk about him says that he's a great guy and someone that Giants fans will rally around for the length of his contract.
What about in the locker room? I mean, you think of new guys that come in and it takes them a little while to kind of feel their way and, establish the grounds. How do you think he'll hit the ground running with the Giants in the locker room?
Yeah, I've never experienced him in a locker room, but I have no hesitation in saying that he'll fit in well. He just seems like a super easygoing guy. He's not like egotistical. You know, there are some of these like high paid pass rushers that are like all about me or want the spotlight on them. Again, Burns is the kind of guy that's going to come to work every day with his lunch pail, do what he needs to do, produce on the field, show up at practice, play through injuries. The kind of guy that teammates like as much as fans will root for as well.
And then, finally, the Giants have Dexter Lawrence, as you know, on the defensive line. You mentioned Kayvon Thibodeau. On the inside, they've got Bobby Okereke. So they have some playmakers there. When you think about, how they might deploy Brian Burns in that defense, and I know Shane Bowen, he's new, and, I don't know how familiar you are with him, but where do you think his best fit is going to be given that other talent that's around him?
Yeah, his best fit is going to be as a defensive end. Like I said, he had 4 years where he played defensive end in Carolina, had 2 years where he played outside linebacker in a 3-4 scheme. And I'm not sure which of those Shane Bowen runs. But yeah, you line him up as a 4-3 defensive end and you just let him get after the passer. I mean, that's where he's going to be at his best. From day one, he was billed as an elite pass rusher in Carolina. And he produced. I mean, he never really saw the big double-digit sack, multiple forced fumble, incredibly disruptive pass rusher that you hoped for. But again, the mitigating factors of not having an elite defensive lineman playing with him on the opposite edge. The team was so bad these past few years that in the third and fourth quarter of games, when it's winning time for a pass rusher, teams are running the ball because they were up by 15, 20 points against Carolina week in and week out.
When you said 4-3 defensive end, with his hand in the dirt or standing up?
Hand in the dirt. Yeah. 4-3 defensive end, hand in the dirt. This past year, he was 3-4 outside linebacker, lining up, outside the defensive tackles. Okay. So I would prefer him to see hand in the dirt, defensive end, really trying to just get a one-on-one matchup with a tackle and get after the quarterback. That's where I think he would be best deployed.
Right, like playing to the tackle's shoulder, I think, to the outside of the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, and then finally, Matt, I mean, is there anything, that maybe we don't know about Brian Burns that's very well known down in Carolina about his skill set, his personality, anything, extra like that?
Yeah, you'll see his brother pop up on Giants Twitter all the time. I cannot remember his brother's Twitter handle, but he was all over Panthers Twitter, replying to fans, running around hyping up fans at home games. He worked with the in-game Panthers hype man. So you guys will get to know his brother pretty well. If you're on Giants Twitter, if you're showing up to Giants games, you'll see his brother all over the place.
All right, Matt, appreciate the feedback. The insight on Brian Burns. I know the Giants are very excited to have him. We met him on a conference call yesterday, and he was very enthusiastic and just seems like a pretty cool guy to cover. So I want to thank you for coming on with me. He is Matt Alquiza. You can find his work over on All Panthers, which is part of the Fan Nation Network. Giant fans, thank you so much for tuning into the Locked On Giants podcast, and we will see you next week with all new episodes of Locked On Giants.